Chapter 13. Well, I catched my breath and most fainted. Shut up on a wreck such as a gang as that? But it weren't no time to be sentimentally. We got to find that boat now. Had to have it for ourselves. So we went a quaking and a shaking down the starboard side, and slow work it was, too. Seemed a week before we got to the stern. No sign of a boat. Jim said he didn't believe he could go any farther. So scared he hadn't any strength that left. So he said. But I said, "Come on. If we get left on this wreck, we are a fix sure." So on we prowled again. We struck for the stern of the Texas and found it, and then scrabbled along forwards on the skylight, hanging on from shutter to shutter, for the edge of the skylight was in the water. When we got pretty close to the cross hall door, there was the skiff, sure enough. I could just barely see her. I felt ever so thankful. Another second, I would have been aboard her. But just then the door opened, and one of the men stuck his head out only about a couple of foot from me, and I thought I was gone. But he jerked it in again and says, "Heave that blame lantern out here, Bill." He flung a bag of something into the boat and got himself in and set her down. It was Packard. Then Bill he come out and got in, and Packard says in a low voice, "All ready, shove off." I couldn't hardly hang on to the shutters, I was so weak. But Bill says, "Hold on. Did you go through him?" "No. Didn't you?" "No. So he's got his share of the cash yet. Well, then come along. No use to take truck and leave money. Say, won't he be suspicious what we're up to?" "Well, maybe he won't. But we got to have it anyway. So come on." So they got out and went in. The door slammed to because it was careened on the side, and in half a second I was in the boat and Jim come tumbling after me. Out with my knife and cut the rope, and away we went. We didn't touch an oar, and we didn't speak, nor whisper, nor hardly even breathe. We went gliding along, dead silent, past the tip of the paddle box, past the stern. Then in a second or two more, we was 100 yards below the wreck, and the darkness soaked her up, every last sign of her, and we was safe and knowed it. When we was 300 or 400 yards downstream, we see the lantern show like it was a little spark at the Texas door for a second, and we knowed by that the rascals had missed their boat, and was beginning to understand that they was in just as much of a fix as Jim Turner was. Well, then Jim, he manned the oars, and we took out after our raft. Now was the first time I began to worry about the man. I reckon I hadn't had time to before. I begun to think how dreadful it was, even for murderers, to be in such a fix. I says to myself, there ain't no telling but I might come to be a murderer yet myself. And then how would I like it? So I says to Jim, first light we see, we'll land 100 yards below it, or above it, in a place where it's a good hiding place for you and the skiff. Then I'll go and I'll fix up some kind of yarn, and get somebody to go out for that gang and get them out of their scrape, so they can be hung when their time comes. But that idea was a failure, for pretty soon it began to storm again, and this time worse than ever. The rain poured down and the light never showed. Everybody in bed, I reckon. But we boomed along down the river, watching for lights and watching for our raft. After a long time the rain let up, but the clouds stayed, and the lightning kept a whimpering. And by a flash showed us I don't know what it showed us, because a symbol just showed up on my phone here. Alright, and the lightning kept a whimpering, and by a flash showed us a black thing ahead, floating, and we made for it. It was the raft, and mighty glad we were to get aboard it again. We seen a light now away to the right on the shore, so I said I would go for it. The skiff was half full of plunder, which that gang had stole from the wreck. We hustled it on the raft in a pile, and I told Jim to just float along down, and show a light when he judged he'd been gone about 2 miles, and keep it burning till I come. Then I manned my oars and shoved off for the light. As I got down towards it, 3 or 4 more showed up on a hillside. It was a village. I closed in above the shorelight and laid on my oars and floated. As I went by, I see it was a lantern hanging on a jackstaff of a double-hull ferry boat. I skimmed around for the watchman and wondering whereabouts he slept, and by I found him roosting on the bitts forward, with his head down between his knees. I gave his shoulder a little 2 or 3 shoves, and begun to cry. He stirred up in kind of a startlish way, but when he seen it was only me, he took a good gap and stretched and says, "Hello, what's up? Don't cry, bub. What's the trouble?" And I says, "Pap and Mam and Sis," and then I broke down. And he says, "Oh, dang it now. Don't take on so. We all has to have our troubles, and this'll come out all right. What's the matter with 'em?" There, are you the watchman of the boat?" "Yes," he says, kind of pretty self-satisfied like. "I'm the captain and owner, and the mate, and the pilot, and the watchman, and the head deckhand, and sometimes I'm the freight and passengers. I ain't rich as old Jim Hornback, and I can't be so blame generous as to good to every Tom, Dick, and Harry as what he is. But slam around money the way he does, well, I've been told him many a plain time I wouldn't trade places with him, for I says a sailor's life is the life for me, and I'm derned if I'd live 2 mile out of town where there ain't never nothing going on, not for all his spondylics and more'n much top of it," says I. So then I had to break in and says, they're in a peck of trouble, and well, who is?" "Why, Pap and Mam and Miss Hooker and Sis, and if you'd take your ferry boat and go up there." "Up where? Where are they?" "On the wreck." "What wreck?" "Why, there ain't but the one." "You don't mean the Walter Scott?" "Well, yes. Good land, what are they doing up there, for gracious sakes?" "Well, they didn't go there a purpose." "Well, I bet they didn't. Why, great goodness, there ain't no chance for 'em if they don't get off that mighty quick. Why, how in the nation did they ever get on to such a scrape?" "Well, that was easy enough. Miss Hooker was a visiting up there to the town, and yes, Booth's Landing. Go on. Yeah, well, she was a visiting at Booth's Landing, and just at the edge of the evening, she started over with her nigger woman to the horse ferry to stay all night at her friend's house. Miss, what do you call? I just remember her name. And they got lost with the steering oar and swung out and went floating down stern first about 2 mile, and the saddlebags on the wreck, and the ferryman and the nigger woman and the horses and all was lost, but Miss Hooker she grabbed and got aboard the wreck. Well, about an hour after dark we come along in our trading scow. It was so dark we didn't notice the wreck till we was right on it, and so we saddlebags, and now all of us but save Bill Whipple. Oh, and he was the best creature. I do wish it had been me, though. By George, that's the beatin'est thing I ever struck. And then what did y'all do? Well, we hollered and took on, but it's so wide there ain't nobody to hear. So Pap said somebody got to get ashore and get help somehow, and I was the only one that could swim, so I made a dash for it. And Miss Hooker, she said if I didn't strike help sooner, come here and hunt up her old uncle, and he'd fix the thing. Well, I made land about a mile below, and I've been fooling around ever since, trying to get people to do something. But they said, what? Such a night and such a current? There ain't no sense in doing it. Go for the steam ferry. And if you'll go and well, by Jackson, I'd like to go, but blame it, I don't know how I will. But with the dingerations going on, who's going to pay for it? Do you reckon your pap? Well, that's all right. Miss Hooker, she told me. She told me particular that her Uncle Hornback. Great guns, is he her uncle? Looky here, you break for that light over yonder way, and you turn out west when you get there. About a quarter-mile out, you'll come to the tavern and tell him to dart out you to Jim Hornback's, and he'll foot the bill. And don't you fool around any, 'cause he'll want to know the news. Tell him I'll have his niece all safe before he can get to town. Hump yourself now. I'm a-going around the corner and roust out my engineer. Well, I struck for the light, but as soon as he turned the corner, I went back and got into my skiff and bailed her out, and then pulled up shore easy water into about 600 yards and tucked myself in amongst some wood boards. And then I got to get this phone because it's probably the sheriff. So it turns out that was the sheriff, but fear not, it was not bad news. It was good news for me and mine. So where were we? Oh yeah, Huck was just trying to get the engineering and the owner of the double-bowed ferry boat to go up and rescue the murderers, because, how does he know? He might not be a murderer one day himself, and how'd he feel? So, this is where we were. I struck for the light, but as soon as he turned the corner, I went back and got into my skiff and bailed her out. Then I pulled up shore in easy water for about 600 yards and tucked myself in among some wood boats, for I couldn't rest easy till I could see the ferry boat start. But taken all around, I was feeling rather comfortable on account of taking all this trouble for that gang, for not many would have done it. I wish the widow had known about it. I judge she'd have been proud of me for helping these rapscallions, because rapscallions and deadbeats is the kind the widow and good people takes the most interest in. Well, before long, here comes the wreck, dim and dusky and sliding along down. A kind of cold shiver went through me, and then I struck out for her. She was very deep, and I seen in a minute there warn't much chance of anybody being alive in her. I pulled all around her and hauled her a little, but there wasn't any answer. All dead still. I still felt a little bit heavy-hearted about the gang, but not much, for I reckoned if they could stand it, I could. Then here comes the ferry boat, so I shoved off for the middle of the river in a long downward slant, and when I judged I was out of eye reach, I laid on my oars, and I looked back to see her go and smell around the wreck of the Miss Hooker's remainders, because the captain would know her Uncle Hornback would want them. Then pretty soon the ferry boat give up and went back for shore, and I laid into my work and went a booming down the river. It did seem a powerful long time before Jim's light showed up, and when it did showed up, it looked like it was 1,000 miles off. By the time I got there, the sky was beginning to get a little gray in the east, so we struck for an island and hid the raft and sunk the skiff. And I turned in and slept like dead people.